Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, July the 28th, 2025. If you're into Western astrology, you've probably been tracking Mars as it moves through Virgo, and Mars has been in Virgo for some time. But if you're into Vedic astrology, then Mars is just moving into Virgo. And this is something I want to discuss in some detail at the end of this video. What does it mean from a Vedic perspective, when Mars changes sign? But I don't want to go into those kind of complications to begin with. Right now, I just want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Monday, July the 28th, 2025. And here is the chart for today, set for noon, New York time. Monday, July the 28th. Don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So here's the chart for Monday at noon, and the moon is in Virgo, still in Virgo, making a conjunction to Mars. In fact, the moon is making a conjunction to the South Node, and it's making a conjunction to Mars. So it's possible that this Mars-South Node conjunction, which I've been talking about for some time, kind of reactivates because of the moon's presence. And so with that Virgo emphasis, there is a possibility that we become sort of overly focused on details which maybe are unimportant, and we might find ourselves becoming agitated by things that just aren't perfect. And this could be the cause of misunderstandings and arguments and general unpleasantness. So, before we make complaints today, we have to ask ourselves, is this really the right thing to do? Is it necessary to let everyone know how we feel? I mean, I'm not indicating that we should keep our feelings to ourselves. It's obviously very important to be open. But, anger has a place, irritation has a place, and if we show irritation in the wrong place, then that could be problematic. Additionally, we have a semisquare between Mercury and Venus. So there's Mercury, there's Venus, they're 45 degrees apart, and so there are a couple of ways of looking at that. Now, you could say, well, Mercury and Venus are making an aspect. 45 degrees apart, doesn't matter whether it's a conjunction, square, opposition, semisquare, sesquiquadrate. There's a connection there. And so, Mercury-Venus as a pair can be quite fortunate. They can be about art and creativity and showing the world how clever we are. And it can be a very sort of communicative combination. Though we could see that 45 degrees aspect as a clash. Mercury semisquare Venus, we're trying to get on with people, Venus in Gemini, but then Mercury comes in the way and asks questions, and there's agitation, and it kind of reflects what I've just been saying about the Moon-Mars conjunction in Virgo, in fact linked with the South Node. So that's more evidence that we really do have to be, careful what we say, and we mustn't be too hasty, and we need to treat people with a degree of respect. And another aspect we've got is Venus biquintile Pluto. So there's Venus, there's Pluto up there, and Venus and Pluto are approximately 144 degrees apart, which is 2/5 of a circle. So biquintiles can be about style, how we present ourselves, how we're trying to present ourselves. And some of us might think that it's important to come over as being sort of quite intense, Venus, Pluto. And there's always concepts of possessiveness and jealousy with Venus, Pluto. But maybe it's somewhat contrived. So if someone is being jealous, if we're being jealous, or if we appear to be jealous and possessive, it might be to some extent an act, because we feel it's the right thing to do. And it's possible in relationships that somehow a bit of jealousy and possessiveness provided it's not taken too far, might be of some benefit. Now, I've said that the moon is moving through Virgo all day. Now, the moon does move into Libra tomorrow at 6:43 a.m. That's on Tuesday, London time. Now, that does mean that if you happen to be in California or the West Coast, British Columbia, Oregon or Hawaii or Alaska, then, very late this evening, before midnight, the moon will change sign and will move into Libra. So you might notice a change. I mean, I don't really want to go into it too much. In fact, I don't really want to go into it at all, because it's just a couple of hours and it's right at the end of the day. So I don't think you're going to feel it, even if you are in Honolulu. So that's a picture in New York. If we look at the picture for Sydney, Australia, there's not a great deal of difference there. Again, moon is in Virgo, all day long. That Moon-Mars conjunction that I was talking about, you're not going to feel its immediate impact today. It might be more about tomorrow. So today might be less aggravating than it is if you're in the Americas, but it's a subtlety. I don't think there's a huge amount of difference between America and Australasia. And then there is a heliocentric view. Heliocentric view, of course, putting the sun at the center of the solar system. And so we're still looking at a T-square. I mean, we've got Mars still opposition Venus. We've got Mercury widely opposition Mars, Mercury widely opposition Venus. You might say that Venus is sort of making an aspect, that would be a sesquiquadrate aspect to the Mercury-Mars midpoint. So there might be quite a lot to say, and if you try to relate to people with this heliocentric aspect, with this T-square, but it's not just so much about emotions. It's more about what has to be said or what should be said. And the right things can be very useful, but the wrong things, they could be confusing. They could be upsetting, and we do have to be a little careful what we say. And additionally, Mercury is making a trine to Uranus. You can see heliocentrically we've got Mercury in Capricorn making a trine to Uranus in Taurus. And so, that does stir things up, and it does emphasize, the verbal side of things. And the question is, how much do we say? Do we say too much? And that is a possibility, and we have to watch out for other people talking too much. And if other people talk too much, we might want to respond. We might want to respond aggressively, but I don't think that is such a good strategy. And now I want to look at things from the viewpoint of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Monday, July the 28th, 2025. Aries, you are feeling somewhat aggravated. I mean, a lot of people are feeling aggravated. It's not just you, but there are quite a few things that you just can't help noticing, and you're inclined to point them out. And being an Aries, you like to be upfront. You don't want people to play guessing games. And if something needs to be said, well, it needs to be said, doesn't it? Yet there is a danger that you maybe take things too far. You notice something that strikes you as being important at a particular time, and as far as you're concerned, it needs to be discussed. You want to get it sort of put right, but your hastiness, and perhaps there's a lack of subtlety here. You just think that it's just okay to be open and honest, but it isn't always okay to be open and honest. And if you respond to people in a aggressive way, then they'll respond back similarly. So just because you notice something, and just because you know you're right, and I'm sure in many cases you are going to be right, and just because you're absolutely sure you're right, another person is wrong, don't necessarily make a big thing about it. Particularly if it's not critical, if it's not, if it's not safety critical, if it's something that you can just let it pass. Just be ready to do that, because if you start getting aggravated, it's just going to be it's going to be difficult to stop. And additionally, Aries, it might be sort of more constructive if you think about yourself, rather than worry about what other people are doing or not doing. Then maybe you should just concentrate on your own life, making sure that everything is in order. And I'm sure that there are things you can do, and there's always the danger of projection, isn't there? You know that things aren't perfect, you've made mistakes, but it's just easier to blame other people. And I mean, I'm not saying that is the case, but I think you need to be open to that possibility. Now, I don't think that today you need to just keep quiet. You've got a lot to talk about, and a lot of the stuff you're going to be talking about, is very useful, very interesting, and so do feel free to express yourself, but it should be about enlightening everyone, giving people a chance to hear your ideas. And it's not about feeling that you have to impose any ideas on anyone. You absolutely don't. Though you also shouldn't forget that there is a semi-square between Mercury and Venus today, and so some people have limited patience with too much talking, or you say something that isn't necessary, and they don't want to hear it. So perhaps, Aries, it might be a good idea to just be careful what you talk about. And additionally, don't underestimate other people. People do have strong feelings, or at least they're trying to demonstrate that they have strong feelings, and there is actually a difference there. And so, how do you deal with people who are being sort of overly dramatic? And it would be easy to draw the wrong conclusions. So if someone gives the impression of being overly emotional or possessive, or you think they might be jealous for one reason or another, don't take their behavior or actions at face value. It could be an act. For some reason, they're just trying to give an impression, but it might not actually be real. Now, one aspect we do have, which I've already sort of hinted at, but I think it needs to be stated, is that the fact that there is a conjunction between the Moon and Mars. And the Moon and Mars, does indicate that there are certain things that you're angry about, in that sort of Aries way. Aries anger it's very quick. You don't sort of hold on to it, and you have to think about how that anger is manifesting. And if that anger manifests in the wrong way, it's not just about having arguments with people. It could affect yourself. So if you're doing something, particularly something of a routine nature, and you're feeling angry, then there's a possibility that you mess up, or you make a mistake, you do yourself a minor injury. So it might be a good idea, Aries, if you just monitor yourself over the course of the day. Monitor your reactions, the way you feel, and if you do find yourself getting annoyed, just pause. Stop what you're doing, especially if what you're doing is safety critical. In that case, you don't want to be doing it. You don't want to be driving if you're angry. So ask yourself, what annoys you, and why does it annoy you, and what can you do about it? And it's just passing. It's this Moon Mars conjunction it's a fast moving aspect. So it just may be a period of the day where you're just not feeling entirely comfortable, and it may just be best that you don't get caught up in your own anger, and don't allow this sort of anger to cause wider chaos and even damage. Taurus, there is stuff going on. Well, there's always stuff going on. There are a couple of aspects involving Venus. Venus is, of course, your ruler, and we do have a semi-square between Venus and Mercury. Now, arguably, the Venus-Mercury semi-square is the main aspect of the day. So there is something very mercurial about Venus being your ruler. And one reason for that is that Venus is in Gemini. Venus is still in Gemini. Now, later in the week, Venus does change sign, and it moves into Cancer. So Venus is moving through the last degrees of Gemini, and with this semi-square to Mercury, well, it's making a semi-square to Mercury, the ruler of Gemini. So it could be the case, Taurus, that you have got quite a lot of things to say, a lot of things you want to talk about, and so you feel that you're ready to sort of wax lyrical about your favorite subjects, and you'll always have an opinion today, and you probably won't want to keep this opinion to yourself. And that is good up to a point. Words can be useful. I mean, it's good if other people know what you're thinking and what you're feeling, but there is a danger that you could take things too far, and this Mercury semi-square Venus could indicate, a degree of agitation, and many Taurians are agitated. In fact, it's not just many Taurians. A lot of people today are agitated. It's not just about any particular sign, and you need to think about all the things that could make you annoyed, and they are very much there, and there are things that could make you annoyed which have nothing to do with the daily running of your life. It just could be stuff going on in the world, and you know about it. It upsets you, and you want people to know about it. But the question is, is it useful? And so, in terms of what you're talking about and how much power, even anger, you demonstrate, ask about the relevance, because some people are just not interested. And if they're not interested, why burden them with it? You have your own interests, and you just can't expect other people to share those interests. So, do be a little careful, what you say. And additionally, we have a biquintile between Venus and Pluto. So biquintile between Venus and Pluto, you might feel that you have to change the way you come across, and it's quite an active process. It's not natural. You make a decision that you would like to be more powerful. You'd like to have a bigger impact, and there's nothing wrong with that. We all need to get noticed, and we all need to be taken seriously. And if you're a Taurus, there are definite things you can do. And it starts with you having an idea about what kind of impact you would like to have, and then making sure that it happens. There are steps you can take. It may be about what you wear, what you say, what you don't say, where you go to. And it could even just be about the general vibe that you present, and there is a conscious process there. So you can, to an extent, Taurus, decide, what kind of person you want to be and what kind of image you want to present. And when we're talking about Venus Pluto, we might also be thinking about jealousy and obsession. Jealousy is seen as being a negative trait. Is it always a negative trait? Sometimes demonstrating or suggesting jealousy can be a good thing. It shows that you care. And so that might, for example, have relevance to your various relationships. Gemini, you still believe that there's not much out there that you should be interacting with. You don't really want to make the effort, and that's fine. It's the beginning of a week, and you may take the view that you're just not ready for it. You might ideally like to just have a long weekend, and so if you don't feel in the mood, then up to a point you should just accept that that's the way it is. But there is a problem, Gemini, if you just you stay in one place. You might, for example, want to just spend time at home, doing things that you're familiar with. Gemini as a sign is supposed to enjoy variety and gets bored quickly. That is a bit of a generalization, and today you're not really in the mood for variety. As far as you're concerned, you've seen it all before, and so why would you want to take risks? Why would you want to put yourself out? But the problem might be that if you put too much energy into just one thing, one interest, then it could start to get difficult. It could get quite obsessive, and obsessiveness is a word that comes up today. And I look at this woman outside, and I'm looking through my window, and I just see this woman. She walks down the road and she smokes a cigarette, but she often has this point where she likes to stop. She stops in the middle of the road, and she comes up to a point, and then she turns back. And that's what I'm distracted by. I'm a Gemini. I'm allowed to be distracted. And you could be distracted by things. You really intensely sort of thinking about things. I don't know whether you're a smoker. A lot of Geminis are smokers. I mean, maybe things have changed, but there is something about Gemini and smoking. Is it the lungs? I mean, Gemini rules the lungs, but it's also about existence, isn't it? I mean, with Gemini's, existence can sometimes feel quite tangential, and so if you're smoking a cigarette, there is that moment of existence, isn't there? I mean, it's a very long time since I've smoked a cigarette, but there is something real about smoking a cigarette. I'm certainly not encouraging anyone to smoke a cigarette, but as far as today is concerned, things are real. Don't worry, and you don't have to be too obsessed about any one thing. You don't have to think about anything too much. And if you find yourself staying in one place for too long, energy levels start to rise, and they could in certain situations go critical, and you have to think about the people around you. You can be too much of a good thing, and that is perhaps a good reason why at some stage you need to get out, because if you don't get out, if you don't give yourself some variety, you might not drive yourself crazy, you might also drive other people crazy. And if you're open to various possibilities, there may be a demand or a request that you do something that you don't really want to do. You may feel that you're sticking your neck out, or that it's just a lot of work for nothing, but still it's probably a good idea to give in to that request. I think that really is something that might be important. Sorry, I just switched the left sign over to Gemini just now. I did it rather late in the sign. My apologies. And so, if someone asks you to do something, Gemini, then give it some consideration, even if you don't want to do it, because once you actually do it, and you go out of your way to help someone, or perhaps to adopt a more public profile than you really wanted, then you might find that it actually starts working for you in a way that is quite fortunate. And also, one other thing, Gemini, don't forget, Venus is still in your sign. Venus is now at 27 degrees 3 minutes Gemini at noon New York time. So Venus is getting ready to move into Cancer. And so, maybe you should take advantage of Venus being in Gemini while it is there, because if you miss a chance, well, next time Venus moves into Gemini as well, sometime next summer. I mean, I don't know precisely when, whether it's spring or summer. I should be looking at the ephemeris, but I'm not too familiar about inner planet movements next year, and I suppose I need to start looking them up. But while Venus is in Gemini, you can be sociable, and you've got something to offer. And so if you spend all your time in one place, and you with the shutters down, well, people aren't able to benefit from you. They're not able to benefit from the many contributions you have to make, and additionally, you're able to present yourself as someone who is interesting, who really does have something to contribute. Cancer. It's a day when there might be quite a lot to be said, and it's not just you, Cancer. It's what is happening around you, and it is quite a verbal day. Whatever your sign is, but from your perspective, there is a conjunction between the moon and Mars. You could argue that the Moon-Mars conjunction, represents a powerful force which really encourages you to say something, and you are able to communicate with power and conviction. And if something isn't right, Cancer, then you're going to want to tell everyone about it, and people will listen, though you don't want to take things too far, and you have to make a distinction between what is important and what is just trivial of temporary value. And there is some possibility, Cancer, that you get your priorities mixed up. You decide that particular facts need to be emphasized when in fact they don't matter at all, and you miss the big picture. And in fact, Cancer, thinking about it, there's quite a big danger of that. So if you find yourself being obsessed about something, you really want to highlight something that you regard as being important, ask yourself again, is this really the right approach? And maybe you're missing something. And so don't be in a rush to talk about particular details. Details are a problem. They could be a problem. So if you do find yourself being overwhelmed by detail, just consider the possibility that you could be pursuing the wrong thing. And in general, we've got the moon conjunct the south node. We've got the moon not just conjunct the Mars, so moon conjunct the south node. The fact that it's conjunct the south node and conjunct Mars might just indicate that your emotions are taking you in the wrong direction, and you could get angry about something which really isn't necessary to get angry about. And it might be better if you just you let go of it, and additionally you decide, you make a decision about what's important. And the problem is that if you make the wrong decision about what's important, you might just be setting yourself up for difficulties later in the month. When I say later in the month, I'm talking about the month which started with the new moon. So we had a new moon on July the 24th, and we've got another new moon sort of, when is it? August the 23rd. So think about this. August the 23rd, is that right? August the 23rd, yeah. So think about that lunar cycle, new moon to new moon. And so if you make the wrong decisions now, you get your priorities wrong now, that could feed through, and you might still be having to deal with those wrong decisions by the end of August. And now with the sun and the moon making a 45-degree aspect, this is a sign that the lunation cycle is now starting to be underway, and you do have to make some decision. Now, you might be able to wait until the first quarter moon, but it could be with that sun moon 45 degrees. These are the first decisions you're making, and don't be in a rush, because if you make the wrong decisions, that could lead to something else, and it could just end up as being a big waste of time. And it also goes back to getting hung up on the wrong details. So what should you be doing? It's not up to me to tell you what you should be doing. Anyway, Cancerians don't like being told what to do. But an aspect that you might want to think about is an aspect that's past exactitude. When I did my reading for the week in general, and the last video I did, I sort of talked about the general events going on over the course of this week. I spent quite a lot of time talking about a 40-degree aspect between Jupiter and Uranus. So Jupiter and Uranus are currently 40 degrees apart. And while that aspect was exact yesterday on Sunday, it's still very close. I mean, Uranus is now Jupiter and Uranus are only 10 degrees apart from that 40 degree aspect. It's a novile. And people don't really use noviles very much, as far as I can see. But noviles matter. But noviles are potentially about God. They're about where we can find bliss. When Charles Harvey, in his book, sort of Working with Astrology, talked about 9 and bliss. And so, where is bliss? Where can you find real purpose? And, Jupiter is moving through Cancer. And with that 40-degree aspect, that's perhaps encouraging you to think, way beyond these mundane, temporary details. They're a sidetrack. They could prevent you from getting in touch with what is really important. And there is a chance here with this Jupiter novile Uranus. It's a rare aspect. It doesn't happen very often, and so, with the Jupiter novile Uranus, it has an impact on your sign, and it just does allow you to find purpose. A purpose that just goes way beyond the sort of the temporary nonsense. And so do look for it. And I'm not saying it's necessarily going to be easy, but you can be open and you can be relaxed to sort of new possibilities, and also just something trying to get in touch with you, trying to make you feel that you're part of something. So Cancer, see what you can find and just give yourself a chance, and just don't get tied up in unnecessary detail. Leo, you're in a position where you can see things in a new way. There is that possibility. I was just talking to Cancer, and I was suggesting to Cancer that Cancer might want to tune into the novile between Jupiter and Uranus, because Jupiter and Uranus are 40 degrees apart, and 40 degrees is 1/9 of the circle. So this novile between Jupiter and Uranus is about the number 9. And so this novile does have an impact on you and on how you express yourself. And at the moment, Leo, freedom is really important to you. You want to go beyond your sort of material bounds. If anything has been restricting you, then Leo, you want to break free. And today you do have a chance to break free, and it needn't be painful, it needn't require some huge drama, it needn't be about a struggle. It just could be a realization of what is possible. And don't forget that Sun is in your sign, and it's so it helps that the Sun is in your sign, because the Sun is your ruler. It's strongly placed in Leo, and you're able to benefit additionally from this novile between Jupiter and Uranus. So if you want something to be, Leo, then it very much can be. And if you're honest with yourself, you might realize that something that apparently had been holding you back for a long time, that you'd been taking it very seriously, and it was a very restrictive energy, is just not real. It's not important. You can move beyond it, and there might then be a feeling of relief. Something you thought was a problem is actually not a problem at all. And in this context, it's just important that you don't get sidetracked. You don't concentrate on things that really don't matter. For example, money. Money always matters up to a point, but money can be an obsession. You can take it too seriously. You might sometimes be of the view that money is preventing you from doing all the things you want to do. And there is that temptation today, with the Moon and Mars and the South Node making a conjunction, an inappropriate response to what you're worried about. But again, if you choose to tune into that Jupiter-Uranus novile, you can move beyond the material, and you can start to see things in a new way. And of course, when you move beyond the material responsibly, that doesn't mean to say you just spend money like there's no tomorrow. That's not what it's about, and it's not even about ignoring basic financial things that we always have to be aware of our finances, but we can be aware of it without being obsessed, without getting overly angry. And as soon as you sort of move beyond that, then at the same time things start to resolve. So if you are worried about something and you lose the obsession, then the worry goes, and when you actually look at it again, whatever was bothering you realize that maybe it just wasn't real. So don't get sidetracked by the material, and do whatever you can to sort of move beyond things, because at the moment, Leo, I think you very much can. Virgo. We have planets in Virgo. The moon is still in Virgo. And in fact, we have got a conjunction between the moon and the south node and Mars as well. So that puts a big focus on you. And you might regard yourself as being very important. Of course, you are very important, but you can maybe exaggerate things. You can exaggerate the significance of your own concerns. And if you start expressing your concerns left, right, and centre, then you could undermine yourself. And if we unpack this, the South Node is in Virgo. Okay, the South Node is going to be in Virgo for some time, and with the South Node in Virgo, in general, it's asking Virgo not to be quite so focused on itself and to try to get into the North Node. The North Node is in Pisces. The North Node is in your opposite sign. So with the North Node in Pisces, it's a time when you need to be aware of other people and their interests. It's not about sacrificing yourself for other people. It's just being aware of what's going on in other people's minds. But when you've got the moon conjunct the South Node, it can be very easy to make yourself feel significant. Your issues are the ones that matter, and you've got to give it everything you've got. And with moon conjunct Mars, there are things that you could just get annoyed about, and you might want to express your annoyance, and that would be a shame, because if you start getting annoyed about things, it's just not going to work for you, and it could all be very negative, and you might sort of undermine your own reputation. And you have to think, what should you be trying to do? Well, one thing you should be trying to do is, get people on your side, and, continue to take advantage, for example, of Venus being in Gemini. Venus is not going to be in Gemini forever. In fact, later in the week, Venus moves into Cancer. Venus in Gemini, it's in a high-profile sector of your chart. This is a time when you can make your influence felt, but in a positive way, without having to be pushy. But Venus is making a semisquare to Mercury, and of course Mercury is your ruler. And so with Venus semisquare Mercury, just the things you say, the things you point out, may undermine you, and they're going to make it sort of difficult to get on with people, and difficult to get things done, because in many cases you're going to need other people's cooperation. So Virgo, just because you believe that something is important doesn't necessarily mean that you should talk about it. I mean, maybe you have to talk about it at some stage, but maybe not today. And also, don't be afraid that you're not having an impact. You might, for some reason, believe you're being ignored, or that people aren't taking you seriously enough. Now, this is just a perception. The reality is, Virgo, that you can be charming and attractive and charismatic, all those words that I often put together, and you can be all of that without having to try. It's only when you try that the problems come about, that's when you lose traction, that's when you lose support. And so if you can just go with it, be yourself, not say more than you have to, and just be present, then that's probably enough. And you can be confident that people are noticing you, and they're taking you into account, and in fact, they like having you around. There's something about you they find reassuring, and there's something about you they find attractive. But just don't spoil it, Virgo, by trying too hard. Libra. Venus is, of course, your ruler, and Venus is making a semi-square to Mercury. And so, with Venus making a semi-square to Mercury, that could say something about the way you think and what you say. And there is this question: is this Venus semi-square Mercury a fortunate aspect, or is it maybe sort of not so fortunate? On the downside, with Venus semi-square Mercury, it's possible that you trip yourself up by thinking too much, and all sorts of things could set you thinking. So, for example, if you are someone who is very sociable and you talk to people and you listen to what they say, you might pick up information, and this information might bother you, and it could just be gossip, it could be hearsay, it could just be lies. And so it's very important, Libra, that you do not take things at face value. You might think that you're discovering important pieces of information, which is just nonsense. And so you don't want to be undermined by things that are largely irrelevant, that might even just be lies. So don't allow your own thinking to trip you up, especially as Mercury is retrograde. With Mercury retrograde, Mercury's position, by the way, is getting weaker and weaker because Mercury is moving towards a conjunction of the Sun. And so, that really does indicate that you have to be very, very careful about believing, anything you hear, anything you read. It's almost designed to trip you up and to sort of push you in the wrong direction. So that's a negative way of looking at Venus semi-square Mercury. You could look at it in another way. You could say, well, Venus semi-square Mercury, you have ideas, and you're ready to talk about your ideas and also to talk about your creativity. So the important thing here probably is to be positive, to focus on what can work, and also to focus on what you can do and what makes you different, what makes you special. And if you can do all that, then I think you can be very effective, and then you'll be able to see it through later in the week, because when Venus moves into Cancer, that is an important event. I think that Venus moving into Cancer in a few days' time is going to be something which is going to really help you. It's going to help you get noticed, and from a sort of work status, ambition perspective, I think that Venus moving into Cancer can really be a good thing. And as far as today is concerned, we also have Venus making a biquintile to Pluto. So Libra, do think about the impression you are able to give. You're able to make a powerful impression, and you can do this through your own work. You think about your place in society and all the people you meet, and you think about how they respond to you, and nothing is fixed. You can actually change the way people respond to you with this Venus biquintile Pluto. So by adopting a powerful style, by maybe not saying too much, there are temptations certainly to say a lot for all of the 12 signs, but with this Venus biquintile Pluto, you don't have to explain everything, and being ever so slightly mysterious and holding back on some of the things that and that forces people to ask questions. And so if you can make people slightly confused, and they're not quite sure what you're going to do next. If you can do that, and I think you can do it, again, it's something you can do through your conscious efforts. If you can do that, then I think that is going to, give a boost to your power. Scorpio. Mars is your ruler, and Mars is emphasized today. And the reason Mars is emphasized is because the moon is making a conjunction to Mars. And also, the moon is making a conjunction to the south node. Now, as a result of this conjunction between Mars, moon, south node, there are temptations. There are temptations to be active, to really try hard to make a big impression, and you don't necessarily want to be ignored. And in any sort of social situation, you get attention, and you can force people to pay you attention. That can certainly happen, but there is a danger here that you take it too far. Moon Mars conjunctions can be angry, and there are things that annoy you, and also you can feel certain, or pretty certain, that you're right, and you have to be careful with that. Because just because you're right doesn't mean to say that you need to tell everyone that you're right. Even if you really are right, because you have to understand other people's weaknesses. Other people have their own egos, and they're not ready necessarily to spend all their time listening to you and worrying about what you're worrying about. So if you do find yourself feeling agitated today, then don't necessarily throw that agitation out onto other people, because it might not be appreciated. And this applies not just to your social life, to the crowd. It can also apply to one-to-one relationships. And instead, Scorpio, it just might be better if you were to concentrate on yourself, and what is important to you, and because that's what matters. And as Scorpio, you should know that. Scorpio can be a very self-sufficient sign. It doesn't need support. It doesn't need recognition, and especially now. And so, Scorpio, do what's important to you in your own way. And if you feel annoyed with other people, you feel that you've got to say something, perhaps you can sort of divert the energy into yourself and your own activities. And at the same time, you might have things to say, but if you've got something to say, it shouldn't be sort of tainted by your own opinions. You can make observations, you can point out facts, you can talk about things that you know about. You can do that, but it's not about ego. It's just about you helping people, letting them benefit from your knowledge. Let people benefit from your knowledge. Don't believe that they can benefit from your opinions. There is a difference, because today no one can benefit from your opinions. Opinions are not helpful, and no one really wants to hear about your opinions. You can force them to hear about your opinions, and they might have no choice but to listen to you. And even if they agree with you, they're not going to agree with you, because it's not that kind of day, and people don't really want to be told. Sagittarius. We do continue to have this novile between Jupiter and Uranus. And when I did my horoscope for you for the weekend, which was not my last video, but the video before that, I went on and on about the novile between Jupiter and Uranus. The fact that Jupiter's your ruler, it's 40 degrees from Uranus, and I saw this aspect as potentially as being really quite spiritual and giving you a chance to really understand what it's all about, what you're all about, to be able to almost get in touch with the divine or the divine within yourself. And there can be a sort of a feeling of bliss with this Jupiter Uranus. You see a possibility that you can break free, and breaking free is all about perceptions, maybe seeing that the material world is not everything that it's cut out to be, that you can move beyond that, but at the same time be totally grounded in the material world. And this Jupiter Uranus novile does continue into today, Monday. So don't feel you've missed your chance. So maybe that today, Monday, it can be a continuation of the weekend, and it's a great opportunity to think about yourself and to think about what is important to you. Now, I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but I just wanted to make that clear. Now, aside from that, today, Monday, you clearly have ambitions. There are things you want to get going on, and you might be of a view that you've got to do it now. You don't want to miss your chance, and why wait? And you might even think that today there are specific material things that have to be done. Now, as I've already indicated, you don't want to get too hung up on the material world, but nonetheless you might. There's certainly the temptation there, and some Sagittarians just could sort of push things too far. Maybe they're just in too much of a hurry, and if you're in too much of a hurry, that's just causing instability. One thing leads to another, and if you're agitated, other people get agitated, and you don't. So Sagittarius, it's important that you don't really force the pace too much. I mean that is that's not desirable, and it's unnecessary as well. And instead, Sagittarius, think about what is important to you. What are the things which are eternal? Don't just get caught up on today's priorities, as you might. I mean, some Sagittarians could. There is the temptation there, but I do think that would be unnecessary. And instead, find some sort of security for yourself. Feel comfortable, and additionally, don't get distracted by the weight of the world. You could, feeling that this world is serious. Serious things that you have to take on board, that you have to worry about because no one else is worrying about. By all means, be aware of what is happening, but you don't want to be so aware that there is sort of mass distraction, and you get caught up in one thing, you get caught up in another thing, and you end up achieving very little. Capricorn. We have planets in Virgo. It's always good to have planets in Virgo. If you're a Capricorn, having a moon and Mars in Virgo, as well as the South Node. And so Capricorn, there could be things which you decide you need to take seriously. And what would you be taking seriously? Well, you could be taking your beliefs seriously. because in the Capricorn chart, the sign Virgo is about what you believe in and how you perhaps try to transcend. And beliefs can have limitations, because if once you create a set of beliefs for yourself, you're rather tied to it, and you then have this question of why psychologically do we have beliefs? What are they thought for? Well, the function of a belief might be to create shortcuts, to reduce cognitive processing, because we can't evaluate every single input. How are we going to evaluate every input morally? We just have a broad moral code, but a belief that's just there all the time, and it just filters everything coming our way. So we immediately know what to believe in every single situation. I mean, that's how many people function. But I don't think that's necessarily the right thing for you to do. And you shouldn't necessarily have clusters of belief. I mean, that is an issue, clusters of belief. When I say, what do I mean by a cluster of beliefs? Well, it can happen, doesn't it? So if you believe in one thing, let's say you believe in gun control. So if you believe in gun control, that probably means that you perhaps you don't believe in a death penalty. And very often people that believe in gun control and don't believe in the death penalty, they very often can believe in a legalization of marijuana. I mean, that doesn't seem necessarily intuitive. So you've got these disconnected beliefs that are all kind of fitted together, and that has something to do with political polarization, certainly in America, but probably in other countries as well. But it just makes things simpler if we can just decide what we believe in without having to think about it. We just know. We just instinctively know. We don't even have to decide what we believe in. Every single input, we can give it a moral judgment. And I'm just saying that might be an issue today. And you have to look at every input on its own merits and not jump to a moral conclusion about it. But you might, sort of more than usual, because the moon is conjunct the south node, the moon is conjunct Mars, something might make you angry, almost because you feel it has to make you angry, because it just makes things simpler. It's good, it's bad, it's moral, it's immoral, it's unacceptable, it's acceptable. That's how it could work. And so perhaps the challenge here is to be more discerning and not necessarily jump to conclusions. But Capricorn, at the moment, you are tending to take things rather seriously, and feeling that something has to change, that things are not good enough, and that you'd like things to be better, but on their own, nothing's going to happen. You almost need some kind of revolution, some kind of transformation. And I know that's all sort of pie in the sky, and I should finish with something more grounded. I mean, relationships, and with relationships, I go back to what I said about moon conjunct Mars. The moon is conjunct Mars, and that case might say something about you. It might say something about other people as well. And with moon conjunct Mars, it's quite possible, Capricorn, particularly as the conjunction is tied up with the south node as well, that some people are annoyed. It's not just you who might be annoyed, you who are opinionated. Other people have opinions, and they get annoyed about things, and maybe they have their own views on morality and what is right and wrong, and they're quite keen to express those views. And the question is, what do you do about it? I think that ideally you should avoid moral issues today, issues of right and wrong, certainly discussing issues of right and wrong, and what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. The issues are there, but I think if you kind of make relationships about issues of right and wrong, then that could be difficult. And So if you're discussing things with people, try to steer clear of issues of morality and perhaps politics and religion as well. Aquarius. There is a possibility that you have quite a heavy approach. You regard things as being difficult, and that nothing much is easy. That perhaps everything has to be struggled for, struggled with, and quite why you have that approach. Well, it might have something to do with the fact that still the Sun is opposition Pluto. I mean, I talked about Sun opposition Pluto, last week. You had this new Moon opposition Pluto, but it is still around this Sun opposition Pluto, and of course, Pluto is in Aquarius, Sun is opposition Pluto, and it does have an impact on you, and the whole way in which you see the world, and you see the world as being potentially quite heavy. It's not always easy to deal with, and there are sort of heavy issues that apparently can't be avoided, and these issues, could make you angry. We do have a conjunction between the Moon and Mars in Virgo. I mean, Virgo is a sign that is quite dissimilar from Aquarius, but you still feel it, and you're inclined just to take everything seriously and not to look at at simple possibilities. And so what you possibly should be trying to do, Aquarius, is to make things easy, make things as straightforward as possible. Because if you overcomplicate, you're just going to waste a lot of time, and you could end up sort of wasting opportunities. And perhaps what you should be doing now is taking advantage of what you've got. Venus is in Gemini. Venus is still in Gemini, and Gemini is a sign that has a strong and favorable relationship to Aquarius. Venus and Aquarius and Gemini are they have a sort of a triangular relationship, and hopefully while Venus is in Gemini, you've been able to sort of get in touch with what you can do, what makes you different, and enjoying yourself, enjoying things which are important to you. And if something is important to you, then you can gain great satisfaction from it. And so while Venus is in Gemini, in the last degrees of Gemini, it moves into Cancer in a few days' time, then make the most of it. Don't take things too seriously, because right now it doesn't become you. And if you really feel that something is wrong, that something needs to change, well, it can change, and you have the ability at the moment to create something important. And if you look at the astrology of the situation, here's Saturn. Saturn is at 1 degree. At 1 degree Aries. Saturn is making a sextile to Uranus. Saturn is making a sextile to Pluto. In fact, Saturn is on the Uranus-Pluto midpoint, so Saturn is your ruler. And so with Saturn on the Uranus-Pluto midpoint, you can rest assured that if you're not happy about something, then you can change it, and you can change it quite suddenly. And you don't have to worry about it. So you have the power. It's all there for you. And so you don't have to obsess. And, going back to that Moon-Mars in Gemini, Moon-Mars and Moon-Mars conjunction in Virgo, there's a danger. You just get caught up in the wrong things. You just take them too seriously. You can't see the big picture. But if you do see the big picture, Aquarius, then, you should be aware that change is something you can bring about, and it needn't be too much of an effort. And additionally, you can be helped by other people. Sun opposition. We talked about Sun opposition Pluto before, and there is a danger that you that you might be of a view that other people are too powerful, that other people are not necessarily going to work in your best interest, but maybe you've got it wrong. And it seems very possible at the moment, that the right people, the right people do exist. They're on your wavelength, and they can reflect your own inner desires, and perhaps through certain people, you can find the freedom that you are looking for. So it's just important, Aquarius, that you are as positive as possible today, and that you just don't overcomplicate things. Pisces. I have talked about the novile between Jupiter and Uranus, the fact that Jupiter and Uranus are 40 degrees apart. I talked about that when I did your horoscope for the weekend. That novile is still around. It was exact yesterday on Sunday, but today, Monday, it's still there. It's only, I think, 10 degrees from 10 arc minutes from exactitude. So do make the most of it. And that novile between Jupiter and Uranus, remember, Jupiter is your ruler. This novile is about being able to get in touch with something which is, on one hand, it is beyond you, but on the other hand, it's part of you. And we all have our individual route to happiness and bliss, and just feeling that we're just in the right place. We all have that individual path, and your path is clear, or as clear as it can be, with Jupiter novile Uranus. And the Jupiter novile Uranus is happening at the same time as we have this Moon-Mars conjunction in Virgo, Moon-Mars conjunction wrapped up with the South Node as well. And so you might say that those two energies, one is the higher and one is the lower. The lower energy is to just get, the lower path is to just get caught up in things which are of no long-term relevance, perhaps listening too hard to other people and their worries and their concerns, and they're trying to make you nervous. You could do that. Alternatively, you get into the Jupiter-Uranus energy, and you can just rise above everything and start to really see who you are and what makes you happy. And once you're doing something that really is completely satisfying, completely happy, it's liberating, and it almost goes beyond life and death, because you've hit your path. This is what you are here for. And if you're doing what you're here for, then that can never be destroyed. And so do focus on that Jupiter Uranus novile as far as possible. But the reality is that the moon is making a conjunction to Mars. It's sort of a lower level energy. It's sort of personal planets, Moon and Mars making that conjunction. It's quite difficult to ignore. And so other people could be annoying, and you might feel that you have to spend a lot of time on relationships and worrying about other people's needs. And I don't know, it may be that other people are being more vocal than usual, are really forcing you to pay attention to them, or it just may be about your perceptions. You might be, for some reason, giving certain people more attention than you should be. And fundamentally, Pisces, what matters, is you, and it's about you doing the right thing and having a right sense of proportion, and not getting excessively worried about things which are beyond your control. You could do, as a Pisces, you're a sensitive sign. You can, in some respects, feel the general pain, the general pain everywhere, in the universe, and you can feel that pain, and it's good that you're sensitive, but you don't want to be overwhelmed by it. And what matters is your path, because remember, if you are doing what's right for you, going back to that Jupiter Noval Uranus, then the universe benefits, because you are part of that creative process, and it's something collective, but there's also a personal side to it, because you have your own personal destiny. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and it's now time to look at today from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 11, which is peace. And peace is a very fortunate hexagram. Everything is in the right place. It's a balance. We've got 3 unbroken lines as the bottom trigram, 3 broken lines as the top trigram. That trigram with the broken line, with the unbroken lines, you could say represents heaven, sort of heaven on earth, and then you've got the broken line. Earth is on heaven. Earth has a relationship to heaven. So heaven and earth are related to one another. There's a line of communication there, and so we could say that things really are moving, and so that movement is an essential part of peace, and we just feel relaxed in what we're doing, and that's great. But with the I Ching, one thing is always moving into another thing. You never have a situation where things stay the same, because if things stay the same, then they die, then they're stagnant, and then you can say that that is the contradiction of life and death. We are worried about, some of us are worried about dying, but dying is a process of change. If we were never going to die, and if we were going to stay the same, then we'd be dead. So there's that contradiction there. We have to change, even if that change is about decay and our body disintegrating. That's because we have to move on to something else. So there always has to be change, and at the moments of flowering, that's when things start to disintegrate, and that is inevitable. And we do have a moving line here at peace, and the moving line, the top line moves, and so the top line is the end of the process. And the imagery that the I Ching gives is not great. It's a wall falling into a moat, the structure of something breaking down, and we might like to keep the structure going. Well, let's somehow get the wall together before it falls into the moat, but it's a waste of time, and we have to accept that times of peace, times of calm, times of relaxation, well, they can't last forever, and we have to get ready for the change. And so it's important not to be complacent, and if you see a change, don't hold on to the past. The past might have been great, but the past can't live forever. The past and the present, it just cannot exist forever. So top line moving, then that does mean that we move to a second hexagram, and the second hexagram, well, does talk about progress, the taming power of the great. And even if the walls are falling in, even if we've lost that peace, that feeling that things really were moving, we've got something else. And the taming power of the great, that could be about our own greatness and what makes us different. But the great needs to be tamed. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. Whereas the question is, are we the great being tamed, or is the great able to tame? And we have to show some discipline and taming power of the great. We have to be aware of the past, and just because things are falling apart in the present, there are things from the past which maintain their influence. The great, what is great? The great is perhaps what we learnt in the past, sayings from the past, wisdom from the past, that will keep us in order. We might like to respond, we might like to do something crazy. We might in theory have the power, but is it the right thing to do, to use that power? I think we have to be disciplined, and I think that really is important. So today, with these hexagrams, with peace transitioning to the taming power of the great, and this concept of having that peace, but it starting to break down, we should remember this is just a hexagram for today, and it's not necessarily going to be an easy day, but we need to be aware of the challenges, and we need to keep things going, and we need to be able to move from one situation to another situation, and keep our cool, and not we mustn't overreact, and we must allow the wisdom of the past to guide us forward into the future. And now I want to finish with Mars moving into sidereal Virgo. So I do look at Western astrology. I also look at Eastern astrology. I regard myself as being a Western astrologer. But if you've looked at my videos, you will know that I do dabble in Vedic astrology, and I have dabbled in Vedic astrology for a long time, almost as long as I've been studying astrology for. It's something that I've always been aware of. And there are differences between Western and Vedic astrology, and one big difference is the zodiac. So the Eastern zodiac, there's a thing called the ayanamsa, and the ayanamsa represents the precise difference in degrees between the Western zodiac and the Eastern zodiac. And the most common ayanamsa that most people use is, there are other ayanamsas, but the most common ayanamsa is the Lahiri ayanamsa. And so if we use the Lahiri ayanamsa, the Vedic signs are approximately at the moment 24 degrees behind the Western signs. So 24 Virgo, for example, Western is equal to 0 Virgo Eastern. And so there are moments when you get the sign change. So if you're into Western astrology, you can look up an ephemeris and it will tell you precisely when a planet changes sign. So if I look up here, I can see, hopefully, that Mars moved into Virgo, Western's Virgo, on the 17th of June at 9:35 a.m. British summertime. So I can see that. And Mars and other planets will change sign obviously differently from a Vedic view. So here is a chart for Mars changing sign, moving into sidereal Virgo. So it actually happens today at I make it 10:29:30 a.m. on July the 28th, 2025. I didn't look that up, that sign change. I sort of did it by sort of trial and error. So I think that's the approximate time that it happened. And so, why should we care about Mars moving into sidereal Virgo? Well, if you're into Vedic astrology, Vedic astrology uses whole sign houses. And so so for example, this is the moment that Mars moves into Virgo, New York time. If it's at 10, well, not the moment, yeah, probably the moment. It's sort of just before 10:30 in the morning, and at that time, well, in the Western chart, early Libra was rising, but Eastern Mars was rising and Virgo was rising using the Eastern zodiac. So what does that matter? Well, in Vedic astrology, aspects are not just about angular degrees. Angular degrees are sign by sign. I know if you're a Western astrologer and you use whole sign houses, there's a similar view. So what happens when Mars moves into sidereal Virgo is that it is immediately making an aspect to the opposite sign of Pisces. So quite recently, Saturn moved into sidereal Pisces. So what that means is that now, from a Vedic perspective, Mars and Saturn are in opposite signs, and they will stay in opposite signs until Mars moves into sidereal Libra, which is, I think, 13th, 14th of September. So for the next, 6 weeks and more, just over 6 weeks, I think, Mars is going to be moving through sidereal Virgo, and it will be in an opposition to Saturn. So from a Vedic view, you could say that we're in a Mars-Saturn period. Now, that Mars-Saturn, from a Western perspective, we have a exact Mars-Saturn aspect on, I think it's around August. Let me just tell you when the exact Mars-Saturn opposition is. It is on the 8th, 9th of August. And so you can say, oh, that Mars-Saturn opposition is at an exact time. But from a Vedic, and I suppose from a whole sign view, if you're into traditional sort of Greek astrology, you have a similar approach, I believe, but I'm not an Alexandrine classic astrologer. That's not really that started to become popular a bit ahead of my bit later from my time. But so you could say now that between now and mid-September, it's just Mars-Saturn, and so Mars-Saturn is going to be a difficult influence. And Mars-Saturn, I always talk about Mars-Saturn as a death pair. It can be a very frustrating time, and it could be a long summer, and things could go wrong. And we also have to think about what it means for individual charts. So from a Vedic view, you have whole sign houses. So if Mars moves into when Mars moves into Virgo, and you've sidereal Virgo, and you've got planets in Virgo, it doesn't really matter where those planets are. Mars is going to be aspecting those planets. That cannot be helped. And if you've got planets in Pisces, likewise, it will be making an opposition. And so what I wanted to do was just look at a few people and a couple of sort of organizations and events that might be impacted by Mars moving into sidereal Virgo. And I'm going to be using the sidereal zodiac. So I'm not going to be using the Western zodiac. I'm going to be knocking off, 23, 24 degrees, just to give us an idea. And this is going to be very general. I'm not making any really specific. I'm not making any specific predictions here, by the way. I'm just looking at a few people and seeing how they might be, how and who might be impacted, by Mars moving into sidereal Virgo. So, let's start with the UK, and here is the horoscope for when last year, when Keir Starmer became Prime Minister. On July the 5th, 2024, I'm making it 12:15 p.m. Now, I'm using the Eastern zodiac. So July the 5th, you think, the sun is in Cancer. But if we knock off 23 degrees, 23, 24 degrees, the sun is back into Gemini. So when Starmer became Prime Minister, at that time, Virgo was rising. So what this means is that Mars is moving into the rising sign of the Starmer regime. And so Mars is now making this opposition to Saturn across the first house, seventh house of the Vedic chart of the Starmer government. And, we already know that the Starmer government is in trouble. It is in big trouble. There is civil unrest. There's been issues about immigration, very real concerns about the economy. People are talking about, at some stage, perhaps Britain having to call in the IMF. I don't know whether that's true. I'm not an economist. Britain called in the IMF in 1976, but while Mars is in sidereal Virgo and making that opposition to Saturn, because remember sidereal Saturn is now moving through Pisces, so the rest of the summer and into September could be very difficult for Starmer. And there is another reason for thinking things might be difficult for Starmer, and that relates to Starmer's chart. So here is Starmer's chart, again his Eastern chart. Now for Keir Starmer, we do not have a time of birth for Starmer, but we do know that his moon, his sidereal moon, in his Vedic chart is in Virgo. So the Starmer's government has Virgo rising, and Starmer has the moon in Virgo. So the moon is in Vedic astrology is more important than the sun. So I'm more interested with an aspect to his moon than an aspect to his sun. In fact, there is a Chandra Lagna chart you can use in Vedic astrology where you put the moon on the ascendant. So what you can actually do is we can rotate the chart, and we can put we could regard Virgo as being Virgo as being rather like the ascendant in his chart. So but the fact is that Starmer's got his moon in Virgo. He became prime minister when the ascendant was Virgo, and so we've got Mars moving into Virgo. Mars is making an opposition to Saturn, so that is further evidence that things are going to be difficult for Starmer and his government. Now, turning to France again. I find France interesting, but I don't know a great deal about France. But there are three opposition leaders, if you like, who all have Virgo rising. So Jean-Luc Mélenchon has, this is his Vedic chart, remember, he's got Saturn in Virgo and he's got the ascendant in Virgo. And he has got the moon in Pisces. So Jean-Luc Mélenchon, he's a sort of left-wing leader of the left, and his reputation on the left is increasing. People, I'm not saying I agree with him, but he's regarded as being quite an important figure. And so Mars is moving into Virgo, and so Mars is going to be making an opposition to his moon, certainly in both west and east. So Mars is moving into his ascendant. He's already got Saturn in his seventh house, transiting Saturn in his seventh house. So Jean-Luc Mélenchon certainly feels the heat with Mars moving into Virgo. And on the opposite side of the political spectrum, Marine Le Pen, she also has, in her Vedic chart, she has Virgo rising. So Mars is moving into her first house. And additionally, another politician on the left who was talked about as a potential prime minister last year is Lucie Castex. Don't know really anything about her, but she likewise has Virgo rising. So I don't know what is about Virgo rising. Again, Vedic Virgo rising. So maybe the opposition in France, over the summer, over the next 6 weeks, has kind of got its work cut out. And what is Macron going to be up to? He's perhaps going to be trying to undermine the opposition or split the opposition. So, summer traditionally a sort of quiet time in France. France doesn't sort of close down over the summer, but it's not going to be closing down necessarily for these people. So if I were to advise them, they need to be very aware about what's going on. And just the fact that all three of them, have Virgo rising may be of some importance. And looking at other charts, there is Trump's inauguration. So this is the horoscope for Trump's inauguration, and the Vedic chart for Trump's inauguration. And so when Trump was inaugurated, the moon was in Virgo. So now that sidereal Mars is moving into Virgo, even though sidereal Mars is 24 degrees away from the moon, the aspect has still started. So, and also now we've got Mars opposition Saturn. So Mars opposition Saturn from sign by sign, because Mars is in sidereal Virgo, Saturn is in sidereal Pisces. When Trump was inaugurated, the moon was in Virgo. So that is hitting the moon. So it's not going to necessarily make things easy for the Trump regime. And we also need to think about the vice president. Vice president has moon in Virgo. Again, I know he has moon in Libra, Western, but he has moon in Virgo, sidereal. So with Saturn opposition, with Mars opposition Saturn across Virgo, Pisces, that could affect JD Vance. And finally, I think I'm going to stop here, but Friedrich Merz, the Chancellor of Germany, he has, again in his sidereal chart, he has a conjunction between the moon and Mars, because we don't know what time Merz was born, but we do know for sure that sidereally Merz has the moon on the moon. He definitely has the moon in Virgo. So I think that is that's definitely going to affect him. And so if we switch the chart round, we put the moon on the first house. So in Vedic astrology, there is a chart called the Chandra Lagna, so I think I just mentioned, where you make the moon the first house. So even though we don't have Friedrich Merz's time of birth, we know he's got moon in Virgo, so we can kind of regard the moon as being the first house. And so he's got this moon-Mars conjunction, which is problematic, and he seems to be quite sort of warlike. He seems to want war with Russia, and that sort of represents sort of bad memories, don't you think? I mean, that's I don't know. If one talks about the collective of Germany and how Merz relates to a collective of Germany, one doesn't necessarily want to speculate, does one? But clearly a difficult and dangerous man, Friedrich Merz. And so over the next 6 weeks, he's going to have Mars moving through his first house using Chandra Lagna, and Saturn is going to be in sidereal Pisces. So that Mars-Saturn opposition that we have until mid-September, until September the 13th, 14th, is hitting his moon and the Mars. And so one wonders what his summer is going to be like, what his plans are. It looks like he wants to enable Ukraine to send long-range missiles into Russia. How's that going to work? I think it may not be such a good idea. I don't think it is such a good idea. But this is an example of why we need to think about Mars moving into sidereal Virgo. And I mean, I'm sorry, maybe I've made it more complicated than I should have done. But I think we do need to consider other approaches to astrology, and it's not, Western astrology is what I practice most of the time, but we sometimes need to look at what's going on in the East. And today Mars does move into Virgo. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.